Good morning. I'm Bob MacWright. I'm the director of the Office of Technology Development here at the Salk Institute, and welcome some of you back, others for the first time, to hear a bit about patents and licensing and technology transfer. And I'm very pleased today that our licensing associates, Kiren, Rockenstein, and Rachel Mullen, have agreed to give you kind of a primer on how our office works and how you can work with us to protect your inventions and hopefully get those technologies into the hands of patients in need. Anyway, here's Kiren.
That's good. Start off with a round of applause. That's fantastic. Okay, so I thought I would start off. Thank you. I thought I would start off by giving you a really high-level overview of what the OTD is and what we aim to do. So as you all know, the work that's conducted at the Salk and at other academic institutions is pretty much the fundamental building blocks of the technology that ends up in the hands of patients and in hospitals and the people in need. Where the OTD functions is at the interface between academia and industry. So we want to be the kind of conduit that takes the technology that's been developed in the Salk and try and find the appropriate partners in industry that will be able to develop that technology and take it forward and make it really useful for patients and the people that will benefit from it the most. So the idea behind this talk came from a number of visits that the licensing associates have been doing in the labs, and we have found there's common questions that people have, and often they're kind of given in a timid voice, like people are too frightened to ask, so they think they should already know. But we wanted to have this talk be the answer to the questions that you're too afraid to ask. So the typical questions that we tend to get from people are, how do we go from having an idea to getting it patented and to eventually getting it commercialized? When should I start talking to the OTD? And, when should I think about patenting something? What are the stages involved in getting patent protection? When we have patent protection, how do we get a license? What is a license? How does the OTD look for licensing partners? And why bother? Why should I go through all this hassle? What is the benefit of this whole process? So I'm hoping that this talk will give you some of the answers to these questions and generally help your understanding in what the OTD does and how we want to interact with the members of the Salk. So I'll start off by giving you a very high-level overview of the process involved. So it starts off with somebody having an idea. They'll come and talk to somebody at the OTD, or we'll come and talk to you either as part of our scheduled lab visits or on a more one-to-one basis. We'll help you file an invention disclosure statement, which I'll go through in more detail in a minute. Sometimes things don't need to be patented to be able to be licensed and shared. So these things are generally classed as either reagents or something that we call tangible materials, which I'll discuss in more detail in a bit. These things, as I said, don't necessarily need patent protection to be shared, so they're shared via MTAs and other types of licenses. If we decide that something would benefit from being patented and receiving that kind of protection, we will typically file a provisional application. That's the first step that we go through. I'll talk about all these steps in more detail in a minute, but essentially the provisional application gives us two choices that we can make. We can either then go on to file a US non-provisional application, which will provide protection in the US, or we'll file an international application, which is called a PCT application, and that provides for worldwide protection. So the first question, I guess, would be, when should I come and talk to the OTD? The short answer is, talk to us as often as you can and as soon as you can. And that's followed by the long answer. It's because there's a number of different things that can hinder your ability to get patent protection. So these kinds of things are commonly talking or presenting a poster at a conference or publishing a manuscript. So it's really important that you come and talk to us before any of these events take place. And even if you think the idea is too early, we can either help you we can help you by suggesting experiments or data that would eventually happen and help with patentability. We will also help you file out an invention disclosure form. So this is the first step towards getting patent protection. It's really designed to help us get a really good understanding of your technology and the benefits of commercializing it. Once you've filled out the form, we'll continue to follow up with you. And I mean, we can help you fill out the form as well, that's not a problem. But once it's been filled out, we'll continue to follow up with you and see if you've generated any new data that can be used to support the application. It's important to point out that getting a patent doesn't preclude you from publishing your data. In fact, it's the other way around. If you publish your data, sometimes it can hinder the patent process. But getting a patent actually allows you to freely share that information. Once we have some kind of an application in place, you're free to go out and discuss your data and your results at conferences and publish as many manuscripts as you would like. So the next thing I want to just spend some time on is what an invention disclosure form is. So it's essentially a simple 2-page summary of your invention. It's found, well, I'll tell you a little bit more about where you can go and find it in a second, but we ask you to fill out the form with, there's little boxes that you can fill out. It's a Word document, so it's easy for you to edit, and there are certain questions that we ask on the form. So the types of information that we will ask for are a simple descriptive title of the invention, a general description, any plans that you may have for continued research and development, any presentations and publications related to the invention that you've either done already or are planning to do. So the sources of funding that were related to the technology, any materials that you've used, whether they were all generated by your lab or if they were bought commercially or if they were shared through an MTA with a different organisation. We'll also ask you for any initial ideas you may have about commercial potential, so other companies that are working in that area that may be interested in licensing your technology, or applications that you can see that your technology would be particularly suited for. We'll also ask you for the names of the inventors and just the designation of the relative contributions of the different inventors to the work that went into the invention. So this will help us kind of downstream allocate how the different royalties and things will be shared. So where to find the form? The form is on our website. So if you pull down and go to the technology transfer, it's also found here. And if you click on the resources for inventors section, this page will pull up all our policies and forms, and the invention disclosure form is right there. And as I said, it's a Word document, which is easily downloadable and editable. Once you've gone through that, just email it to one of us and we'll get back to you. So I guess now's a good time to tell you what a patent is. So a patent is defined by the government as the right to exclude others from making, using, offering for sale, or selling the invention in the US or importing the invention into the US. A patent is different from an academic publication. So the things that go into a Nature, Cell, or Science paper may make great science, but they're not necessarily a great patent application. A patent application really hinges on having a good set of claims that show how useful the particular scientific discovery you've made is to, or it could be, to industry. Now's a good time to tell you about what is considered patentable, and the government decides this as being any new and useful process, machine, manufacture, or composition of matter, or any new and useful improvement thereof. We had a recent talk given by Bob that went into the items that are patentable and what makes them so in great detail, and that talk can be found on the Salk website, right? So I advise you to go and have a look and read and listen to that, because it makes things much clearer. So as I mentioned, not everything needs to be patented in order to be shared and licensed to other people. So common things that sometimes can be shared without a patent include protein cell lines, some kind of constructs, and antibodies. Generally, these have been published or have already been presented at scientific meetings, and these can be disseminated to other academic institutes or other companies under MTAs or licenses. So an example of this kind of interaction is that we currently have a master agreement with Millipore, which can facilitate the commercialization of certain antibodies. And Rachel, who'll be following me in a few slides, will be telling you a lot more about how we market the technology and how we go about finding the right partners for the technology. She'll also tell you a little bit more about the different agreements and licenses that we have. So again, this is a very brief overview of the patent process. So as I mentioned, it starts off by filing a provisional application. We then file a non-provisional application sometime later. We go through a series of formal requirements that the Patent Office requires us to comply with. Eventually, downstream, the patent will be issued. To get an idea of cost, it can typically cost about $20,000 to get a US patent processed and issued. And if we decide to proceed into different countries and file an international application, this cost can greatly increase. So, what is a provisional application? A provisional application is the optional preliminary step before filing a non-provisional application. We say that it's optional. The government just doesn't require you to file a provisional application, but at the Salk we generally do because it's good practice. They're not examined in the same way or in any way as a provisional application. So essentially what they do is provide you with a foot in the door to the USPTO. They lock down a priority date, and the earlier date that you can get, the more beneficial it is for you in terms of when the USPTO will be comparing you to other applications that have been put in at the office. What the provisional does allow you is a 12-month period during which you can collect more data to support the claims or to strengthen the claims in the application. And it provides the OTD with a 12-month period during which we can begin the marketing process and the licensing research, and we can start assessing the technology and see who the best partners would be for it. Okay, after the 12-month period, the application goes through a conversion, and as I mentioned, it can either go into the US only. Typically, this kind of route is chosen when either the work that the application described is primarily conducted in the US, or where we've not been able to identify an international licensee. The other option would be an international PCT type application, which again provides for worldwide protection. And typically we pursue that when the work would have applicability in a number of different countries, and we've identified a licensee who's willing to take the application into those countries. Okay, so there's a number of different steps that require us to interact with the inventors. The initial stages, so the filing of the provisional and the non-provisional, we'll talk to the inventors regularly to see, first of all, that they can help us understand more about their invention. And once the application's gone in, we'll ask the inventors to keep us apprised of any new experiments they've been doing, any data they may have that can be used to strengthen the application. While this is going on, we're in constant communication with the Patent Office. And one of the first things they require from us are some necessary documentation, so an inventor declaration, inventor assignments. These are routine documents that we prepare at the office, and occasionally we may need some information from you, but usually we're pretty good about getting those out to the Patent Office. So once the application goes into the USPTO, that's the US Patent Office, it's passed along to an examiner. The examiner is a person at the USPTO who's responsible for looking at the application and assessing it and deciding whether it's a good application, if it's completely novel, there's nothing else out there and you should be definitely given the patent, or if they have any questions or they need more information. So any correspondence from the Patent Office is called an office action, and any reply that we make to that is called a response. So the office actions can raise a number of different points that the examiners have decided they need more information about. So common issues that come back are a prior art issue. So for example, if your invention or certain aspects of it have already been described either by other patent applications or in journals or are just publicly known, we may need your input to help us either tell the examiner that your invention is very different from what's currently known, or to show how, or to maybe change the application to get around what's currently known. Another type of query is something called a restriction requirement. So this typically occurs when the application that we've put in, the office has decided that it contains more than one invention. So examples may be more than one kind of DNA sequence, or if you have a number of different claims, one to a compound and one to a method of using that compound or a process of making that compound, it's possible that the office may come back and ask you to restrict to either just the compound or just the way of making it or just one particular sequence. During this process, we're going to ask you to help us decide which set of claims, which invention to pursue for this application. And any inventions that we choose not to pursue during this stage can become the subject of future applications themselves. So you're not really giving anything up, they're just asking you to narrow this particular application at this stage. Okay, so after all this communication with the patent office, eventually we will be given a patent application and it will issue. They may have different claims from those that we initially filed because we may have had to change the claims depending on what the office has come back to us and said. But that's fine, we end up with an issued patent. The patents last 20 years from the date they were filed. Therefore, depending on how long it took for the patent to be prosecuted and how long it took for it to get through the USPTO, once it's issued, you may have around 10 to 15 years of patent life left. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to Rachel, who's going to tell you all about how we market and license the technology once it gets to us.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay. So once you have the patent, you need to find a way to tell people you have the patent, or else no one's going to know. Some companies have what they call scouts that go around looking for technologies that line up with their research interests, and that's great because then we don't have to do any work after this point, and they'll just come to us and ask us for the patents. But if that doesn't happen and we do have a patent, we'd like to A, find someone to pay for it, and B, get the technology to the patients or the end users. So in order to do that, we have to market and license the technology. So this is, you'll notice the same diagram that Kiren put up earlier. The little M's stand for when we do marketing. Pretty much all the time, if we can. We want to do it as early as possible to get someone in and start paying for the cost of the patents as early as possible. Ideally, we'd find a licensee in that year between when you file the provisional application and when you do the conversion. The provisional applications cost around $3,000, and then the conversions cost around $7,000, and then the costs just keep going up after that. So it's really good to find someone as early as possible. The challenge is that a lot of times you don't have complete data during that year, because that's the year that you're supposed to be adding data. So that's the tough part, and so it's good to have an idea of what the practical applications of your idea will be in order to tell everyone why they would want to buy it. And marketing done prior to the date of the publication of the patent, which occurs usually around 18 months after you file the patent. It should be all non-confidential descriptions, things we post and things we hand to companies at meetings. We want that to be mostly non-confidential information. If you are going to exchange confidential information, it's good practice to have a confidentiality agreement in place with the company. It's not totally necessary because you do have the priority date set as soon as you file. But if someone hears your idea, says, oh, I see this one step that they forgot, I'm going to go and file my own patent and have this little loophole around it. It's just best to keep it non-confidential. So how we market. Once we've determined, usually with the inventor's assistance, what the value proposition of the technology is going to be, we actively go out and try to market it to companies. One way we do this is web marketing. We post the confidential descriptions on our website, and in case people aren't necessarily coming to our website, we also try to post them on various technology portals. An example of this is the AUTUM Global Technology Portal. AUTUM is the Association of University Technology Managers. It's basically the tech transfer professional organization. And these portals are interesting because lots of different institutes can post their technologies on these portals, and then companies interested in a certain research area can go and sift through research being done at all sorts of different institutes and different academic institutions all at the same time. So that's helpful. Whether or not they're actually doing that, I don't know. We also do a targeted approach. We want to have done research in advance to assess which companies are going to be interested in that type of technology. One way we do this is we ask you who you think might be, because inventors are the ones that know their technologies the best, and you know what companies are working in your area, and you probably know some of the scientists working in that area just based on who's publishing in that space. And again, that was part of the invention disclosure form that Kiren presented earlier, we do ask that you give us any information you might have about market potential and who might be working in that space. We also use other web resources to identify companies like MedTrack, which is a database that compiles lots of information about different deals that have been done, different clinical trials that are happening in different research areas for different companies. And then we also go to company websites. Once the relevant companies have been identified, we try to identify the appropriate person at those companies to pitch the technologies to. That's usually the hardest part, particularly because the infrastructure of large companies are usually changing and it's a different person all the time. There are lists on different databases provided by professional societies that have contact information for different licensing people at all these different companies, but from year to year it changes a lot. The best way we know how to do it is if we already know someone at a company, ask that person to put you in touch with the correct person, but again, like I said, this is the hardest part, so we do put a lot of effort into that. So there's a few different types of academic and industry relationships that we have and that we deal with in our office. One is research collaborations, and this is usually pre-patent status when someone's working on something and they haven't quite patented it yet, and a company wants to come in and collaborate with that person, and we have someone in our office, Paul Robin, who handles all of that, so I'm not going to go into detail. If you have questions about research collaborations, you can ask him, but wait 2 weeks because he's in Russia. He also handles the startups and spin-offs. We're sometimes, as licensing associates, involved in the startups because we do tend to license the patent to the startup, even though the startup may just be the inventor and whoever else they're working with on it. But mainly, we are going to focus the talk on patent licensing because that is what we do. So we're not going to talk about those. To start out with, what is a license? Probably fairly obvious, but just in case. It's a contract that sets forth the terms and conditions under which the licensor, us, grants a licensee, which is usually the company, permission to practice the invention that's covered by the patent in exchange for some sort of compensation. It's usually monetary. It's not always, but usually monetary. And it's important not to confuse this with an assignment. We are still the owner of the patent. We never assign our patent rights to a company. We license them the right to use the patent for whatever it may cover, but we keep the ownership at Salk. So we're never giving away your patent. We are always just letting someone else use it for a while. There's different elements of a license, and they can vary a little bit depending on what type of license you're writing and what the purpose of it is. But basically, they usually tend to address exclusivity, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a minute. It covers what specific rights are being granted. That's really important. You want it to be very clear what rights you're giving the person so that you and they both know what they can do with the license. It addresses payments and license fees, royalties, due diligence, and this means that we want to make sure that when we license a technology to a company that they're going to put their best effort in to commercialize the technology and get it to the patients, because we don't want people licensing our technology and paying us a little bit of money and then sticking the technology on a back burner and never doing anything with it, because then we would want to license it to someone else. Retained rights, this is really important for academic research institutes to include in their license agreements. When we license something exclusively to a company, we want them to know that we still need to be able to publish it and exchange information and materials with other academic research institutes. We don't want to limit our ability to do what Salk is supposed to do. It includes a term, which just says how long the license is good for. So the different types of agreements, we have exclusive licenses, and an exclusive license doesn't necessarily mean you can only license that technology to that one company. It just means you can only license it to that one company for that one thing or that one geographical area. So you can have a license exclusive to China, and then you can have another exclusive license exclusive to the US, or you can have different fields of use. You can license the same technology to one company for therapeutic use, while you can license it to someone else for internal research. So that's what exclusive means. Non-exclusive licenses means you can grant the same exact rights to a number of different licensees within the same scope or field, either consecutively or simultaneously. We have quite a few of those. We have certain technologies that we've licensed 40 different times. and the companies are all aware that there are other people out there using the same technology. It's more common for research tools than compounds or things like that. So, another type of agreement we have that Kiren briefly touched on earlier is a master reagent agreement, and we have one currently with Millipore. We're working on some other ones. These are umbrella agreements with certain companies that facilitate the addition of new materials and reagents to their catalogs. We want it to be easy to add new materials to these license agreements, so we have the blanket agreement, and then we have a 2-page form that we use to add new materials. And each time we do add a new material, we talk about a different royalty rate for that material, because some are more valuable than others. But it's supposed to cut down on the time it takes to do that, and it's also supposed to cut down on the number of MTAs that we have to do, because Pam does thousands of them a year, so we want to ease up her strain a little bit. Another type of agreement is an interinstitutional agreement, and this is necessary when there are inventors on patents from different institutions. A lot of Salk's work is collaborative with other research institutes, and we realize that, so we like to have the terms set up in advance so that we know which institution is going to be responsible for managing the patent, for doing all the marketing and licensing, and also how the revenue will be distributed once there is any. So when do we license? Whenever we can. Like I said before, ideally as soon as possible. But we also want the licensee to be a suitable licensee. So what makes someone a suitable licensee? A company that we know will use diligent effort to develop and commercialize and bring the Salk technology to benefit the public. And we assess this by examining the company's history in the field. If they have a proven track record of working with academic research institutes, that's really important. If they've never done a deal with academia before, they're not likely to know the ins and outs and know that they're going to have to let us publish and let us exchange materials with other research institutes. Financial history of the company, for they're about to tank, it's probably not a good idea to license the technology, because even though they say they're going to recoup your patent costs, they probably won't. And the organization of the company, who are the people involved, if they're trustworthy people, and what their expertise is. So why bother? These are some of the companies we've done licenses with in the past, and we've got, like I said before, lots of non-exclusive licenses and a few exclusive licenses with these companies, and Salk products are on their way to being used by patients, and some already are. And Kiren made that happen, so you're welcome. The other reason is that there's monetary incentives for the inventors. When we do a license, the revenue that comes back into Salk gets divided up. But before that, we also do an incentive program so that if you submitted an invention disclosure and we decide to file a patent application on that invention, we give you $1,000. It's divided up between the inventors, so if there's 4 inventors, you're only going to get $250 each, but still, it's better than nothing. And then once the licenses are done and the revenue from patents comes back in, and this is net licensing income because we do cover the patent costs usually first, and then when there's leftover revenue, we distribute it to the inventors. 33% goes to the inventors and 7% goes to the laboratory of the inventors. If you leave the institute, that 7% continues to go into the lab that you were working in. Your percentage as an inventor follows you. Tangible materials, those materials that we were saying you don't necessarily need to patent to license. When we get revenue in on those, because there's no patent for us to recoup the costs of, you just get 21.5% as a developer, and then another 21.5% to the lab. So the remaining licensing income from these will go to the Institute for General Purposes, and you'll never see it again. So, basically, we hope that from this presentation you were able to see how the different elements come together and how we tried to get your ideas out into the public. And if you have any questions, you can ask us now or you can ask us later.